And welcome to the Tuesday edition of the Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Like and subscribe to the video. Let me ask you to do that right off the bat before we jump into it here. Like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I feel like it's the least I can ask of you as we mire through this period of mourning for Pitt's offense. It's day 2 of the week. Really, it's like day 4 of talking about how disappointing the offense has been. And I started like sketching out like what we're going to talk about on the Morning Pitt. You know, I mean, there's a lot of things sketched out on here. This is the second half of the Clarion game, the Pitt basketball game. This is sort of the plans for the week as far as content. This is adding up the rushing run plays versus pass plays this season. If you take out sacks and kneel downs, save that for another day. And this is sort of our plan for the Morning Pitt. Now, I was like, well, what are the days when I'm not going to talk about the offense? And I said, well, you idiot, you're going to talk about the offense every day. Well, there might be one day where we talk about basketball team because they beat Clarion by like 50 points on Saturday. So looking at that for maybe Thursday, we'll talk about the basketball team on Thursday. For now, it's all offense all the time because, quite frankly, as we've said multiple times, and I'm going to continue beating this into my own brain and standing on the table for this notion, this team should be 6-1 right now at worst. With the personnel they have, with the talent they have, with the schedule they've faced, there's no reason for this team to be 4-3. And the only reason this team is 4-3 is because of the offensive performance. And I don't think anyone has any misconceptions about that. I get it. You get it. Pat Narduzzi gets it. Frank Signetti gets it. These players get it. Everyone understands, even if they don't finger point, and they don't need to finger point because it's the simple reality. When you turn on the TV, you watch the game, you watch the film. When you go back and look at the tape, you're going to be like, wow, the offense sucked. So we understand all of that. All right, and there are going to be different ways that we approach it this week and different things we talk about this week. Yesterday, I just kind of ranted about the offense for 20 minutes or something like that, which was sort of a continuation of Saturday night when I ranted about the offense for like an hour or so, except the difference being that on Saturday night after the game, I had a bottle of Tennessee whiskey, and, yesterday morning, I just had a nice cup of coffee, which we have again today. Now, as I thought about different angles and approaches with this offense, I think there's one thing we have to talk about first. I think there's one thing we have to talk about right off the bat, and that's the quarterback. That's Kedon Slovis. And I think, I've said a bunch of times that I don't think Kedon Slovis forgot how to play football. This is a guy who was successful at USC, who was a, Pac-12 Offensive Rookie of the Year, Pac-12 Offensive Player of the Year, threw 60-some touchdown passes at the Power 5 level. This is a guy who's had success in college football and hasn't forgotten how to play. Now, he's taken some hits. He's gotten knocked down quite a bit. He got knocked out of a game, and I don't think he's necessarily been the same since then. But overall, this is a quality college football quarterback. Is he the most mobile quarterback in the game? No, he's not. Is he really a threat with his legs? No, he's not. Does he need to be? It would help. I don't think there's any question that it would help, but it's not, I don't think it's an absolute necessity. I think if you can throw the ball well and you can operate an offense, you can get by even with limited mobility. It might put you in position to take more sacks, but I think the scheme has to be designed and the play calls have to be designed to take you out of that trouble. You know what I mean? To get you out of those sticky situations by giving you options to get the ball out quickly. But the question I want to consider, and I don't even know if I have an answer to this question. I might have an opinion, and I think we all do, but I don't know that I necessarily have an answer. And the question is, and this is sort of a specific version of a broader topic. The question is, should Pat Narduzzi have benched Kedon Slovis on Saturday night? Should Pat Narduzzi bench Kedon Slovis going forward? Should he make a change at quarterback? And so I started sort of hyper-specific and moved out and made it broader. And I think there are a lot of different kind of tentacles to that discussion. And the first one, before we even get into Slovis and we even get into that specific decision or lack of decision on Saturday night and what it might portend for the team or the motivation behind Narduzzi not making a change, I think it's important to consider the history. Because the reality is, Pat Narduzzi has not been a quick trigger. He hasn't been quick on the trigger when it comes to quarterbacks. He really hasn't. I think if you look over his, 7 full seasons so far and now into his 8th season at Pitt, there are not many, hardly any examples of Narduzzi benching a quarterback in the middle of a game. Now, some of that is due to the fact that for half of this time, for the last 4 seasons prior to this, he had the same starting quarterback, right? He had Kenny Pickett. He wasn't going to bench Kenny Pickett, no matter how poorly Kenny Pickett played. And maybe there's an example to be had there that in 2018, Kenny Pickett threw for 8 yards in the ACC championship game. And holy cow, you couldn't have done worse. But, who were the quarterbacks on the roster at that point? I'm not really sure that you had another option to turn to. But even if we set those 4 seasons aside, if we look back at 2015, 2016, and 2017, there's not a lot of indication that Narduzzi has a quick trigger when it comes to the quarterbacks. You look at 2015 and the way they opened the season, they were in a quarterback rotation. Chad Wojtek would play some, Nate Peterman would play some, and I think that the general feeling was, we'll do this until somebody establishes himself as the best option. And I think it was the Akron game in the rain was Chad Wojtek's last start. And I think Nate Peterman, by the end of that game, had established himself as the best option. Now he goes out and throws a couple interceptions at Iowa the next week, but led them down and almost brought them back and, ultimately got the game into overtime, if not for Iowa's kicker making like a 59-yard kick at the end of the fourth quarter to win the game. And so that I wouldn't say that Wojtek necessarily got benched because it was sort of a rotation situation. Now, later in that season, in that 2015 season, after Nate Peterman had established himself as the starting quarterback, he was in a slump. And I think you can look at a few of the games in the second half there. I went back and looked at, I think, the Notre Dame game. He had 3 completions for like 30-some yards in the first half. I think the North Carolina and Miami games were right around that Notre Dame game were similar. I think against Miami, he only had like 2 or 3 completions in the first half. He wasn't playing well. He played better in the second half of those games, but I don't think Narduzzi would have gotten any pushback from fans or media if he made a decision to change quarterbacks at midstream in those games. If at halftime they came out and went with Chad Wojtek, but he didn't. He stuck with Nate Peterman for better or for worse. And I'm not offering that example as an illustration or a way to say, see, he knows what he's doing. I don't know if he does or doesn't. Do they still beat Clemson in 2016 if he benches Nate Peterman for a half against Miami or Notre Dame in 2015? I don't know. I'm not going to draw that connection. But I offer this as a way to say, look, this was a situation where a quarterback, a first-year starting quarterback, a guy who just gotten on campus less than a year ago, so it's not like he had some long history and connection, although he had some with Jim Chaney. But this was a guy who was a starting quarterback, and Narduzzi was determined to keep him in that role, even if his play would seem to have merited otherwise. 2016, obviously, Peterman played the whole time. There was never any kind of quarterback controversy. 2017, though, is really the only instance I can think of, and really the only one that I could find, where Narduzzi made the decision to bench a quarterback mid-game. And it was the end of the Penn State game, the first game up there, the 2019 game. The 2017 game. And it was actually the game when they rolled out the road retro uniforms, arguably the best college football uniform in history. They rolled them out for the first time. They looked great, and they lost the game like 33-19. And it was a game where they gave up 33 points, but the defense really only allowed like 1 or 2 plays. I think it was still Miles Sanders at that point. Or Saquon Barkley still on the team at that point. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. But the point is, there were, I think, Penn State got a couple short field situations off turnovers early in the game, and the defense really never had a chance to keep them from getting points. And the offense just was stuck in the mud and couldn't go anywhere. And by the end of the game, Ben DiNucci was playing and did enough to convince Pat Narduzzi to put him in as the starter for the following week at Georgia Tech. That game was an abject disaster. Why do I keep saying that phrase, abject disaster? I need to stop saying that, or I need to look up and find what the adjective abject actually means. Because I just sort of say it just sort of rolls off the tongue to say something is an abject disaster. We'll have to look that up and see what an abject disaster is. Passing for 8 yards in an ACC championship game, maybe that's going to be the picture next to the word abject. Either way, Ben DiNucci replaces Max Brown in the Penn State game, stays in place as the starter going down to Georgia Tech. Pitt's defense forces or recovers like 4 or 5 fumbles in that game, a bunch of turnovers, wins the turnover battle, and their offense is still so bad that they end up losing 35-17. By the end of that game, Max Brown is back in. He's back in as the regular quarterback, and they sort of stick with it from there. So you have, obviously until Brown got hurt and then DiNucci comes in. But you have a situation where DiNucci gets benched, or Brown got benched in the middle of the game, and they went with DiNucci, and then they ultimately benched DiNucci and brought Brown back in. Now, later in that season, after Kenny Pickett's red shirt had been burned on one play at Syracuse because DiNucci's chin strap came off, everybody remembers that fun story, there was, I think a week or two later, I forget, it might have been the next week, they played NC State, and Kenny Pickett got a series or two in the second half or something like that, or second quarter, I forget exactly. He didn't look like anything special. DiNucci took back, it wasn't a case of DiNucci getting benched. It was a planned rotation to have Pickett get some snaps in that game. They go on and they beat, I think, Duke and Virginia, and then they lose to Carolina. And so they go into the penultimate game of the season, and it's the game at Virginia Tech, right? It's the 2017 game at Virginia Tech, which everyone remembers for some pretty unfortunate reasons. Nobody remembers Nathan Bossery catching a touchdown pass on a fake field goal, right? Everybody always forgets that awesome play. Everybody thinks more about the what happened down at the goal line at the end of the game. But in that game, there was a planned rotation. The plan going into the game was Ben DiNucci would start and play the first quarter. Kenny Pickett would come in and play the second quarter, and then they would decide at halftime who they wanted to go with for the second half. Now, history was written because they went with Kenny Pickett and he never looked back. He only missed time when he was injured. He never missed another healthy game again. And so in that situation, ultimately DiNucci got benched, but it was part of a plan. But it's not the same thing. It's not what we're talking about with Saturday night's game where you get to halftime and say, holy cow, the quarterback's playing so poorly, we have to make a change just to try and give a spark to the offense. It wasn't a case. That wasn't the case. And so when you look over, and then obviously once Pickett's in as the starter, he never looks back. He's the starter for the next 4 years. So you look over 7 years of Pat Narduzzi as the head coach at Pitt, and you really have maybe that one or two instances of, the Brown to DiNucci swap as the only time where he benched a quarterback mid-game for poor play. It's just not what he does. It's philosophically, or he just doesn't believe it's the right thing. And I actually asked him about it. Asked him on Monday at his weekly press conference yesterday, and I said, because the topic of quarterback changes came up, and the topic of the quarterback came up, and I said, look, you were asked after the game on Saturday night if you thought about changing quarterbacks, and you pretty much shut it down, and he did. I mean, he just said no. He was absolutely not. And I said, the reality is you really haven't done that at all over the course of 8 years here. Is that something you're just sort of philosophically opposed to? And he basically said, yeah, he doesn't like changing a quarterback in the middle of the game. He doesn't think it's he doesn't think it's in the team's best interest. He doesn't think it's good for a team psychologically. And then he went into a rather long diatribe about how Kedon Slovis still is the best quarterback on the team, and even invited the media, said one of you can come out and watch a scrimmage sometime and draw your own conclusion. So he really doubled down on that idea that Kedon Slovis is the best option on the team. And that's interesting. I'm going to get to that in a second, okay? Because we started with sort of the biggest picture, which is Narduzzi's history with benching quarterbacks. Then we're going to talk about something he said there about the psychological impact. And then we're going to move in sort of specifically to the Kedon Slovis situation. And I think when Narduzzi's talking about the psychological impact, I think you need to think about coaches and how coaches think, because one of the most common claims or common phrases that fans use in a lot of situations, and certainly when it comes to changing a quarterback, is let's see what this guy can do. Let's see what happens. Why not give him a shot and see what happens? Maybe he can provide a spark. And I think that's something that fans say a lot. I think it's something that media say a lot. I think it's a common refrain. But the problem is coaches don't think like that. They don't think, almost across the board, coaches want to rely on the things they know and believe. Coaches want to rely on what they can count on, something they believe is reliable. They want to count on the known, not the unknown. It's very rare that a coach is going to say, what the hell, let's just give it a try in the middle of a game. It's very rare. Even things that seem like a surprise probably have some precedent or antecedent in practice or in meetings that they discussed it or they worked on or they talked about it. Very rarely will they just give it a try. And part of that is because coaches are control freaks and they want to have every element controlled as much as they possibly can. Another part is, kind of what Narduzzi said about Kedon Slovis and scrimmaging and in practice. They see these guys. They have hundreds of hours of film. They have hundreds of hours of meetings. They have hundreds of hours of game tape on which to make these decisions. And I think as I've gotten older, I've gotten less and less interested in opining on personnel decisions. Why isn't this guy playing? Why isn't that guy playing? Why don't they use this guy? Why don't they use that guy? Why don't they just put him on the field and take some of the you take some of the mistakes in exchange for the high playmaking ability and all this? Coaches don't think that way. Coaches are going to go with the information they have. And if the information they have says that one quarterback is better than the other, if hundreds of hours of practice film and scrimmaging and film work and meetings and all this stuff point to one guy being better than the other, they're going to play that guy. It's really that simple. We'll put in Nick Patty, see what he can do. I think they feel like they know what Nick Patty can do, or they know what Nate Yarnell can do. And while Kedon Slovis has had his issues and he's had his struggles and he has not played well, Pat Narduzzi said he was above average in the first half at Louisville when he completed 9 of 13 passes and threw 2 terrible interceptions. And I kind of know what Narduzzi's saying because I mean, it's a classic, other than that, how was the play Mrs. Lincoln situation, but other than those 2 interceptions, Slovis did play okay in the first half. I thought the offense as a whole was okay. Pretty, even borderline good in the first half. I mean, you can't ignore the 2 interceptions and the fumble. So it is, like I say, other than that, how was the play? But the coaches know what they're looking at. And they have a lot more to base it on. And so, and that's hard for us on the outside. Because what we know is what we see in the game. And what we see in the game is the quarterback's not playing very well. What we see in the game is the quarterback ignores the check down right in front of him to throw it over to a receiver who's covered and throws an underthrown pass that's easily intercepted. What we see in the game is a quarterback who looks like he can't process the information on the field, that he can't make the reads, that he can't operate the offense. That's what we see in the game. And ultimately, what happens in the game is what should happen, or is what should count the most. But if the coaches are sitting back and looking at practice and looking at reps and scrimmages and snaps and film work and all that stuff, and they're seeing a distinct difference and a distinct separation among the quarterbacks, their jobs are riding on it. Nobody ever chose to play the worst player if they felt like if they felt like there was another player who could give them a better chance to win. I think that's what it comes down to. And I don't think it's about deferring to seniority, because we're talking about Nick Patty, who's himself a redshirt senior. I don't think it comes down to deferring to loyalty, because Kedon Slovis has been on campus for 10 months. Nick Patty's been here for 5 years. I think it comes down to they feel like he's the best option. They feel like he's the player, the quarterback who gives them the best chance to win. And I was having a conversation with some other people, and somebody said, you wonder how it affects the locker room. If the other players are watching Kedon Slovis struggle on the field and no change is made, what do they think? And I can understand this, and we're going to dig way too deep into something we don't actually know about, which is the psychology of the locker room. But I could easily see the flip side, where all those players are at practice too every day. They watch the film too every day. And I could easily see players having a pretty clear idea of who the best quarterback is. And that if you're in a game and it reaches a point like maybe the game on Saturday night did, and you make a change at quarterback, I could see the players saying, really? Are we giving up? And I'm not saying that's the case, and I don't mean that as a knock on Nick Patty. It's mostly illustrated of the fact that we don't know what that locker room perspective is on these quarterbacks. But if Kedon Slovis is head and shoulders above Nick Patty and Nate Yarnell right now with how he prepares and with how he practices, then the rest of the team sees it too. And the rest of the team probably believes in his potential too. And the rest of the team probably believes that he's the best option too. And I know, hey, some guys just practice better and some guys play better in games. Well, those guys who play better in games should practice better. And then they'll get their opportunity. I mean, like, that's what, and that's not about Nick Patty. That's not about Nate Arnell. That's about dozens of guys over the years. Oh, I'm so tired of hearing the coaches talk about how this guy practices so well. Give me the guy who can play well in a game. Well, if the guy who can play well in a game wants to play well in a game, he should play well in practice and then to make a really easy decision for the coaches. And I'm not defending the decision here. I wanted to see Nick Patty, on Saturday night. I wanted to see if he could just do something different. If he would maybe give him a little spark. If he could just, let's just see what happens. But I'm not the one with $1 million career riding on that decision. And I'm not the one with access to the hundreds of hours of information and research and, say information, I guess is the word that I was looking for, on which to base that decision. And I think that was one thing that was interesting about Pat Narduzzi is he really doubled down on Kedon Slovis being the team's best quarterback. And I think anything we say in support of that or running contrary to it is speculation based on what? What do you and I know to either, and this goes for whether we want to endorse Pat Narduzzi's comment or we want to argue against it. That's the view of Narduzzi. It's the view of the coaching staff, and that keeps Kedon Slovis in the starting job. All right, a couple other things. Two Deep Day. The Two Deep came out yesterday. Pitt's new depth chart. There's actually some changes this week. There's actually a few things that have been changed. Jaden Bradley was removed from the Two Deep after transferring or announcing his decision to enter the transfer portal. Gavin Thompson is now listed as the backup to Jared Wayne. Carter Warren is removed from the depth chart after the announcement he is out for the season. Branson Taylor is now the listed starter at left tackle ahead of Ryan Baer, even though Matt Gonsalves started at left tackle against Louisville. Owen Drexel is no longer on the depth chart. He's been out since, I think, the Tennessee game. He played the first 2 weeks, did not make the trip to Western Michigan. Expected him to be out for a little while. He's no longer listed on the depth chart. Jake Cradle is now the listed starter at center ahead of Terrence Moore, with Blake Zabovic listed as the starter at right guard, and Jason Collier, who was formerly at tackle, listed as the backup right guard. Matt Gonsalves or Gabe Hoy as your starters at right tackle. In the matter of Owen Drexel, I thought he would be out for a while. Pat Narduzzi said he's not out for the season. He's just took him off the depth chart, but it seems like it's going to be a while for him. On defense, not much in the way of changes. Some oars at defensive tackle. Deion Hayes is on there as the backup. Hayes played for the first time since the Tennessee game the other night at Louisville. Bengali Kamara or Tyler Wiltz as starters at star linebacker, which I thought was pretty interesting. Kind of speaks to maybe the resurgence of, or not resurgence, but the surge of Tyler Wiltz. He had 6 tackles, 6 total tackles, I should say, in the game at Louisville, tied for the team lead with Brandon Hill and Servassier Dennis. He's been playing well lately, and so he gets the nod there as an starter with Bengali Kamara. We'll see what they end up doing with that. And then Cam Guess, listed as the starting punter and starting holder. Well, he's been the starting holder, but he's listed as the starting punter over Sam Vanderhaar. Guess took over that job at Louisville. Sam Vanderhaar, apparently injured, did not make the trip to Louisville. Guess punted. First one wasn't very good, but I think he got better after that. So it looks like he might hold on to that spot for a little while, either due to performance or injury, whatever it is. Maybe Sam Vanderhaar, at least for the time being, got Wally pipped. So we'll see what happens there. All right, and then finally, as we do every Tuesday, we take a look around the Coastal. It feels less and less meaningful as Pitt drifts down the standings in the conference and in the division. Pitt is 1-2 now in the Coastal Division. They're behind Duke, who's 2-2. They're tied with Miami, who's 1-2. They're behind Georgia Tech, who's 2-2. They're ahead of Virginia, who's 1-3. They're ahead of Virginia Tech, so that's good. But North Carolina leads the pack. Tar Heels were off last weekend, as was Virginia Tech, but the rest of the division was in action. Thursday night, Virginia beat Georgia Tech. We said that was a game that would help Pitt if Virginia could pull it off, because that would help eliminate some of the tiebreaker with Georgia Tech after Georgia Tech beat Pitt, but that means a whole lot less now that Pitt lost to Louisville. Brennan Armstrong threw for 255 yards. Jeff Sims had to come out of the game, did not play. He played a little bit for Georgia Tech, completed 6 of 11 passes. Zach Gibson came in 10 of 25 for 99 yards. He's not good. Georgia Tech's not good. Virginia's not good. But they played, and somebody had to win, and it ended up being Virginia. The other game in the Coastal, Duke at Miami, and this was interesting. Halftime, it was a 17-7 game. Duke was leading, and then Miami kind of battled back. They had a chance, even after Tyler Van Dyke got hurt and went out of the game. Miami came back and scored 2 touchdowns to open the third quarter, and was up on Duke, 21-17, but then it was all Duke after that. Scored 4 unanswered touchdowns, including a pick 6 to end the final score at 45-21. Tyler Van Dyke, like I said, came out of the game with an injury. He was 11 of 16 for 81 yards and a touchdown, replaced by Jake Garcia, who threw 2 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. And he started off strong and then just went completely in the tank. And Miami, they're swirling. They're swirling the toilet bowl right now. 3-4 overall, 1-2 in the conference. Not really all that much worse than Pitt, but they look like they are reeling. Henry Parrish back in action, 11 carries for 63 yards. You remember Henry, he was committed to Pitt at the same time as Izzy Abanikanda. But 11 carries for 63 yards, not too impressive of an effort. Abanikanda now is still the leading rusher in the ACC at 959 yards. Nobody else has as many rushing yards. Nobody else has carried the ball as much. Nobody else with more than like 80 carries is averaging averaging as many yards per carry as Abanikanda. He's at 6.1. He's also leading the conference in touchdowns at 13. He's averaging 137 yards per game. He should cross the 1,000-yard mark at North Carolina on Saturday night. This is reality. He needs 41 yards to do it. I think he should have that against a pretty suspect North Carolina run defense. But of course, I don't think there's much to think about when it comes to North Carolina's defense next week or this Saturday night. It's all going to be about their offense and whether or not Pitt can score enough to keep up with Carolina's offense. And Pat Narduzzi was asked, can you compete in a shootout game with North Carolina? And he said, no way. Which I admire his honesty, because he's right. There's no way Pitt would compete in a shootout track meet game with North Carolina. They're going to need to control the ball. They're going to need to eat the clock and eat a lot of it and hope they can keep Carolina off the field and make 1 or 2 stops and try and win this game like 28-24 or something, 24-21. I think it's going to be really hard to hold Carolina to that low point total. But that's the challenge when you're facing North Carolina. All right, we're going to have more offense talk, more personnel talk, tomorrow on the Morning Pitt and throughout the week. We'll talk some hoops, of course, and then as we end the week, we'll look at keys to this North Carolina game and look around the Coastal Division. So we got a lot to do this week on the Morning Pitt. Make sure you like and subscribe. That is all very important. And check out Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. The most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Football, basketball, recruiting. You can find it all at Panther-Lair.com and message boards where you can interact with hundreds and thousands of other Pitt fans. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Hope you're enjoying this beautiful weather in Pittsburgh. It has been lovely this week. Hopefully it keeps it up for at least a few more days so we can enjoy it. Hope you had a great Monday. Hope you have a great Tuesday. And we will talk to you again on Wednesday morning for the Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.